So, the topic of today's video may be a bit controversial, seeing as Yugi Muto is often portrayed as having an unfair advantage as it relates to the card game of Duel Monsters. With his ability to draw any card at any time, it would seem the odds are stacked overwhelmingly in his favor. But if you look a little closer at the Yu-Gi-Oh series and think about the theme of it all, or put in other words, what the series is saying, you'll start to realize that Yugi's ability to top deck is much more than that. It's actually a statement about life. And that's why Yugi never cheats. So how does this series start off? Well, 2 words.
Exodia! Obliterate!
And for those unaware, our protagonist Yugi Muto is right next to losing this duel when this happens because Seto Kaiba has summoned 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons, which were some of the most powerful cards in the game at the time. Kaiba is even so confident in himself that he says,
"This game's over no matter what card you draw."
Unfortunately for Kaiba, during the course of their duel, Yugi remembers that his grandfather once told him about a card that instantly wins when summoned.
The unstoppable Exodia!
Now this card is really 5 separate cards, and a player has to accumulate all 5 in their hand to win a duel. Yugi has already drawn some pieces and has been believing in his deck to draw the rest among other cards. So long story short, by believing in his deck, or his grandpa's deck if you want to get technical, and also believing in the heart of the cards, Yugi summons
the unstoppable Exodia!
And Kaiba is all like,
Impossible!
And thus we are hooked from the first episode. But the greatness of Yu-Gi-Oh's opening hook isn't the topic today. Today we're defending Yugi's method of dueling. You see, this same pattern of being in trouble and facing overwhelming odds continues throughout the series. And we keep watching because we want to see how Yugi is going to pull off a win no matter what he's facing. But this is where viewer analysis comes in. And with viewer analysis comes either an accusation or understanding. Now the accusation that can be made is that Yugi duels by cheating or using an unfair advantage or tactic. I've even heard some fans call the heart of the cards the heart of my. But on the other side of these accusations is understanding. And understanding goes a little deeper. Here's what I mean. To come to a proper conclusion about the fairness of Yugi's dueling strategy, you have to understand what Yu-Gi-Oh as a series is saying. And here's what it is. You see, what Yu-Gi-Oh does so effectively is force opposing persons to clash. And when these opposing persons clash, their dueling decks often represent their personalities and beliefs. And thus, the personalities and beliefs clash at full force. So Yu-Gi-Oh is in reality a show that puts ideas against ideas and then lets the result play out on the big screen. What does Kaiba duel using? Power, because that is what he believes in. He brute forces things, hence a more power-based deck and approach. He also tries to overwhelm his opponents with power, hence 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons, and he enjoys triumphing in spectacular fashion while his opponents never stand a chance. It is also worth noting that Kaiba has a lot of money, and money is often seen as being synonymous with power. So Kaiba is obviously a representation of this idea of power. Now what about Joey Wheeler? Well, he duels using faith in the heart of the cards, a bit of luck, and a mix of weaker cards that he somehow finds a way to win with. So Joey Wheeler represents the underdog, yet he represents more than that. He also represents the one who has faith and is willing to mix that with a bit of luck or gambling, hence cards like Time Wizard, Roulette Spider, the dice cards, etc. And he's a good picture of the scrapper who finds a way to win even though his cards aren't big league cards. So Joey Wheeler's ideas: faith, underdog, bit of gambling. And just as an aside, note that Yusei Fudo from Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds also has a set of ideas he represents. The satellite is full of people just trying to get by, so Yusei's deck is apparently weak. Yet his experience as a scrapper who brings amazing good from almost nothing propels him forward as a duelist. So Yusei's ideas would be faith, due to his belief in his deck and himself, scrapper, due to his scrapper nature, and maximizer, among other things. Now here's the important thing to take note of. Yugi Muto is one of the only characters in Duel Monsters who duels exclusively using faith. And this is why he's near unbeatable. You see, what the show is saying is that belief in yourself and or in a higher power, the heart of the cards here, is the most powerful force in life. Remember what I said about the show being about putting ideas against each other? Here are some examples. Yugi versus Kaiba. First duel. Faith versus overwhelming power. Faith wins. Yugi versus Weevil. Faith versus cunning and trickery and conniving evil. And by conniving evil, I mean when Weevil tricks Yugi into letting him hold Exodia, then throws it off the ship.
Say goodbye to Exodia!
Well, guess what? Even without Exodia, Faith still wins. Joey versus Mai. Faith in gambling versus deception and vanity. Faith in gambling wins. Joey versus Kaiba. Faith in gambling versus overwhelming power. Overwhelming power wins. Also note that factors like lack of experience and confidence come into play when clashes like these happen. This is why some duels would be lost if friends did not enter the picture to bolster a struggling duelist. Think Joey versus Bones. He didn't stand
The ghost of a chance in a duel against me.
Yugi versus Kaiba, round 2. Faith versus overwhelming power. And note that Faith is now without Exodia. Faith still wins, but another idea is introduced: kindness and concern. Therefore, Yugi lets the opportunity to win go, and Kaiba wins. But Kaiba's overwhelming power isn't the deciding factor. You all understand? This is what the show is really about. And the reason Yugi isn't cheating is not only because he in reality represents those who believe in themselves and in a higher power, but also because this same power is available to everyone else. Note that Joey believes in the heart of the cards, and it often works out in his favor. He is simply less skilled earlier in the series and can't always capitalize. Note that this is also due to his mixing in gambling with his playstyle. Gambling isn't as consistent as Faith, and when it bums out on Joey, we see that that's the case. And going back to our point about everyone having access to Faith, note that even characters like Kaiba have exercised faith in the heart of the cards. When Kaiba is dueling Pegasus for his brother Mokuba, he realizes that Pegasus is somehow reading his hand. So what does he decide to do at one point?
Pegasus, your underhanded dueling tactics have gone on long enough. I may not know exactly how you're cheating, but somehow you can see my cards. So, I'm abandoning my present hand. Perhaps if I can't see what I'm playing, you can't either. I've put all my faith in this next card. So now let it be revealed!
In other words, he places his faith in his deck and in the heart of the cards. And what happens? Well, it turns out to be a Blue Eyes, which Pegasus wasn't prepared for. Under intense duress, Kaiba has faith and absolutely kills it. And this is the first time he really jumps ahead in the duel. But unfortunately, Kaiba isn't used to dueling by faith, and his deck is so focused on overwhelming power that it is built in as a strategy, and unfortunately for him, it's a losing one. Think about it. Kaiba loses this duel when his Crush card gets turned against him. But what does Crush Card Virus do? It targets and destroys power in other people's decks. You see, though Yugi has shown Kaiba multiple times that power isn't the answer, Kaiba's deck is so tied to his ideology that even when he's trying to duel by faith, it holds him back. And when his Crush card gets used against him, he's only left with Monster Reborn and can only revive Sagi the Dark Clown. So his deck's power-based profile is extremely weak to masterful cheating because power is not enough to overcome a cheater like Pegasus. Pegasus may just steal your power, as he did multiple times in this duel. You know what is powerful enough to stand up to masterful cheating though? You guessed it, faith. And regular faith isn't even enough here. To defeat a masterful cheater requires someone who possesses masterful faith. So Yugi defeats Pegasus by believing that there's a way to win, and finding it. That isn't to say he never doubts himself or the outcome, but that he is good enough to triumph in the end. And the message here is that anyone with Yugi's mastery of faith as it relates to dueling would also be able to beat Pegasus even if it was in a different way. Now all that being said, Kaiba does return to his former ideology later in the series, but that's not the point here. The point here is that despite this loss, Kaiba's moments of faith are there. Also note that Kaiba's failure here resembles Joey's inability to capitalize earlier in the series due to lack of experience. And this isn't the only time Kaiba has had faith. Once again when dueling in Battle City, Kaiba is about to win his duel with Ishizu by attacking with his Egyptian god card Obelisk the Tormentor. Yet he doesn't know that Ishizu has set a trap that is attached to Obelisk that'll win the duel as soon as Obelisk attacks. So Kaiba carries on and is about to attack. But then he gets pulled into a vision by the Millennium Rod and has an inclination that his trusted Blue Eyes is the answer to winning this duel and not his god card. Having faith in his deck and these strange visions, not overwhelming power since Obelisk is much stronger than Blue Eyes, he sacrifices Obelisk and summons Blue Eyes. which kills the Shizu's trap card and wins him the duel. By faith. And the list goes on. This is why Yugi is near unbeatable. And note that the only times he loses are when he wins by faith and chooses to lose for a reason he deems worthy, or faces an opponent who also uses faith, or his faith is somehow compromised.
What have I done?
Here are some examples of Yugi losing to show my point. Yugi vs Kaiba, Round 2. Faith wins, but kindness and concern gives up the win to protect a man's life. Yugi vs Rebecca. Faith wins, but kindness gives the win away to teach a lesson the opponent needed to learn. Yugi vs Joey at the end of Battle City. Faith versus faith and probably gambling. And I say probably because we didn't see this duel play out. Yet we know that Joey won this duel because he has his red eyes in Yu-Gi-Oh! The Dark Side of Dimensions. And that is what the duel was for. So for Joey, faith and probably gambling, and maybe an X factor like knowing the red eyes belong with him, wins. Yami Yugi versus Little Yugi. Full-blown faith, because Yami now knows who he is, versus perfected faith, because Yugi's faith has been perfected and built by his experiences with Yami. Perfected faith wins, but with the subtle hinting that this is the result that should have happened, since Yami Yugi has to go to where he should be, and Little Yugi has to now stand on his own. Yugi versus Raphael. Take note, faith versus faith. For the first time in our series, a villain has faith. And even more, there's a twist of Raphael's faith having the intention of corrupting the opposing faith. And he succeeds. So opposing faith, Yugi's faith in this case, is corrupted. And Yugi switches to the idea of overwhelming power by using the seal of Orichalcos. Well, guess what? The duel dynamic is now faith versus overwhelming power. And we already know how that turns out. This is the theme of the show. The game of Duel Monsters is simply a backdrop set against the real world to show how real world situations lead to the clashing of ideas and what the results would be. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is very deep, and only those with a trained eye will see just how deep it all runs. And please note that this idea of a story rewarding or punishing a character based on the path they choose is normal to any good story, as is the arguing of which ideal prevails in any given situation. As a brief example, spoiler alert for Suits. In Suits, Mike is a fraud lawyer, and when finally confronted with a trial and jury, his fiancée tells him to show them who he really is and have faith that they will see he should be a lawyer. He agrees to do this and testifies as to what kind of person and lawyer he is and will be. Then the jury goes to deliberate. Now while the jury is deliberating, Mike has two choices. Because if the jury decides he's guilty, he could go to prison for 7 years. But if they decide he's innocent, he walks as a free man. But the prosecutor, Anita Gibbs, is also willing to cut him a deal for 2 years of prison time if he pleads guilty before the jurors come back from deliberation. So with all that info, Mike's two choices become that he either has faith in the jury and what his fiancée said, believing that he will be let out as a free man, or he cuts a deal with Anita to get 2 years instead of a possible 7. What does Mike do here? Well, he ends up cutting a deal with Anita, though everyone tells him not to do it. So Mike doesn't have faith. After Mike is sentenced to 2 years, Harvey, Mike's mentor, tracks down a juror to find out what the result was. And lo and behold, Mike was found innocent.
Guilty.
I didn't say that. That woman didn't make her case. And I'm not letting my country's justice system go to shit on my watch.
Say it.
Not guilty. They told us you guys cut some kind of deal. Guess you should have had a little more faith in the system.
So Mike's lack of faith lands him in prison, while having faith would have made him a free man. And any good story will do this. The characters must be rewarded and punished for moving towards the right or wrong outcome in any given situation. Mike chose arrogance and lack of faith by ignoring everyone's counsel and thinking he knew best. Where did that land him? In jail. But if he would have had faith like everyone suggested, he would have been a free man. All that being said, let's get back to Yu-Gi-Oh! And before we jump back into the core of what I'm saying about Yu-Gi-Oh!, I want to say something briefly to counter anyone who says I'm wrong because Yugi has Destiny Draw. And that is that Destiny Draw is irrelevant. Now for those who don't know, Destiny Draw is an ability to draw any card at any time that we later find out Yugi was developing throughout the series. This ability is apparently activated by Yugi's Millennium Puzzle and or his ancient Egyptian roots, and activates whenever he needs a certain card in a duel. Now before I even tackle this point, I want to note that Destiny Draw is not canon. Rather, it's an anime-only filler kind of thing. But even so, let's run the hypothetical to show why it doesn't matter. Now something as powerful as Destiny Draw, if it were applicable, may sound relevant here, but it would still be irrelevant for these reasons. Unless you want to argue that every single person who believes in the heart of the cards and is able to draw a needed card during a duel has Destiny Draw, the point falls apart. Kaiba, as I've shown, exercises Fate. Joey exercises Fate. Yusei exercises Fate. Even characters like Jack Atlas have spoken in ways that suggest a level of faith in themselves and in their decks, and the list of people like this throughout the Yu-Gi-Oh series is endless. In fact, the entire point of Yu-Gi-Oh is to show that anyone can be like Yugi if they believe in themselves and or a higher power. So while Destiny Draw is a valid point to bring up, and one I can understand people challenging the message of this video with, in the face of everyone in the show being able to duel using Fate, it becomes a moot point, unless you want to suggest that everyone has Destiny Draw, but that's a different argument. And note that even if I grant that Destiny Draw is what Yugi and perhaps even everyone else is using, you still have to believe to use Destiny Draw. This is why the deck starts moving away from Yugi when he starts to doubt in episode 1.
My only chance now is to assemble all the pieces of Exodia, but the odds are against me. I don't think I can do this.
The deck, it senses my doubt. Don't lose focus, Yugi. Don't lose faith. Concentrate.
So however you want to look at it, faith is the core principle in this show, and there isn't really any getting around it. Now all that being said, please note that I'm not saying every duel can be broken down in this way. Some duels have higher stakes, and some are more friendly. Maybe things like that also influence the outcome. And maybe with that in mind, the true theme of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that when the chips are down, faith in yourself and or a higher power always wins. And it is only when you lose faith that you can be defeated. Now don't get me wrong, the show doesn't always perfectly embody this theme. This is especially evident when a character winning goes against where the author wants the story to go. For an example of this, just look at Joey versus Merrick. If not for convenient writing, Joey would have won that duel. And to be honest, he should have won that duel. Still kind of pissed about that, not gonna lie. But either way, the point remains. If you were to talk to Yugi about his dueling style, he'd probably just say I ain't cheating.
I'm just ahead of the curve.
Now as a final question to the audience, with everything I've now revealed about the Yu-Gi-Oh series, who do you think won the final duel we saw was about to happen between Atem and Kaiba at the end of Yu-Gi-Oh! The Dark Side of Dimensions? As a bit of a hint, think about the ideas that are coming into play here. What is Kaiba bringing to the table? And what is Atem bringing to the table? If I get enough interaction from the comment section on this question, I'll eventually make a video where I explain who I think would have won and why. Now all that being said, I'm glad you tuned into all this. I've always really liked the premise of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm glad that I got to tackle it in a review-like manner. That being said, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. And I'm always open to discussion, so consider dropping a comment too. I do go through them. Alright, see you guys in the next one.